You need a lot of light, otherwise it tears. And you look like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland.
That's true, actually.
As Mayor Beamish sort of disappears in and out of the.
Need a lot of light, otherwise it tears.
Exactly, yeah.
And you look like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland.
That's true. Okay, you are live on YouTube
As
now.
Mayor Beamish sort of disappears in and out of the. Need a lot of light.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's interesting, the delay.
Yeah. Councillor Lumley, welcome. And it is, I have 3 o'clock. The gang's all here, so we will call this meeting to order. And this is the Committee of the Whole for June 15th, 2021. And I acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Call the meeting to order at 3 o'clock and ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Crowell, thank you. Councillor Ladwig. Any changes or additions to the agenda that anybody wants? Please, seeing none, well, all in favor? Thank you. Ask for a motion, please, to receive all of the reports that are on the agenda today. Councillor Crowell, thank you. Councillor D'Andrade, thank you. All in favor of receiving the reports? Thank you. Thank you. So we have 3 reports on this particular meeting, and we'll just go straight on to the first one being the housing strategy for the town of Gibsons, and invite the Director of Planning to come forward. Thank you.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you. So Matt is also going to be joining
Matt,
us.
good to see you.
There he is. Hey, Matt. Okay, so this report presents the committee with a draft housing strategy that is based on recommendations that came out of the Sunshine Coast Housing Needs Assessment Report and the Implementation Framework Report. So when the Implementation Framework was presented to Council in January, Council passed a resolution to endorse those recommendations as the basis for a housing strategy, but wanted additional information on how to prioritize and implement those actions with associated timelines. So I worked with Matt Thompson, who is the community housing lead with Urban Matters, who led the regional housing needs assessment and the implementation framework report. He helped do a deeper dive into the impacts and timelines and costs associated with each recommended action, which has been added to the table. Many of these actions are already underway within the town's jurisdiction, and I am working with the SCRD and District of Sechelt planning teams to discuss opportunities for regional cooperation for some of the regional items. The recommendation in the staff report is to endorse the housing strategy for the town of Gibsons. So I'll pass it over to Matt to present the strategy and breakdown of impacts, timelines, and costs. So thank you, Matt. Over to you. I'll share my screen so that everybody can see the strategy.
Thanks, Leslie-Ann, and thanks, Mayor and Council. Appreciate seeing you again today and continued action and movement on this front with regards to housing. So Leslie-Ann has provided good background for kind of the continued work, the ongoing work that we're doing. But maybe I'll just preface this by saying that, as we moved from the housing needs report into the development of the implementation framework, that implementation framework was really intended to do a lot of the groundwork necessary to support or develop housing strategies for the coast communities that we were looking at. And so in that report, of course, there's quite a bit of background on the role of local government, the role of senior government, both new funding opportunities from both the province and the federal government, and some best practices. And so the idea was that we just sort of lay out practices that are taking place around primarily BC, but some other communities as well, and then build them into a bit of an implementation framework. And so the sort of deeper dive or additional work that we've done then to support further action here is to do, what we might do in any municipal strategy, which is associating some implementation considerations onto the action items. So we've restructured them a little bit, reordered them in terms of, where they fit in terms of our timeline. We've associated some costs with them, and we've talked about the impact here in this grid that we'll be moving through. So Happy to receive any questions regarding the items. I won't just read through all of them, but I will try to endeavor to talk about the implications of each of these items, particularly as they fit in with the four sort of larger objectives that we've laid out. So Leslie Ann, I think we can move to the next page here. So in terms of the way that this is framed, we've sort of identified kind of three decision-making elements. One are the impacts. How impactful will each of these measures be? You know, is it going to make a big difference, a small difference, or a moderate difference in our actual housing needs and demands? And you know, I'd like to preface this by saying that there are not very many things that local governments do that are going to have a high impact, as in solve the problem tomorrow. But when combined with senior government investments and actions, then that's where we're likely to see items that have kind of a higher impact going through the strategy. We've also set some timeline expectations around, you know, what it might look like to implement and accommodate some of these things. And not surprisingly, there's often a correlation, at least, between shorter term items and lower impact, although it's not always the case that all short term items are low impact. Sometimes the low hanging fruit is easy to get done, but it's not always the stuff that's going to have the big effect. So we've provided some timelines for, you know, given staff resources, current development environment on the Sunshine Coast, what it might look to implement various of these measures. And then finally, we've provided three sort of tiers of cost. One is, you know, the single dollar sign, which is it will be sort of partial staff time working on it, probably a one-time plan or a single-time policy development. Two is, you know, potentially smaller capital works or ongoing programs that need to be monitored by staff. And then $3 signs to indicate either bigger one-time projects that require a larger investment, or a long-term staff increase or time commitments to kind of continue to monitor and implement a program. And of course, in those actions where we're looking to other partners, sometimes the costs may be associated to the broader partnership and not just the town itself. So I'll talk about that a little bit more as I get there. I think we can move into the next slide. Thank you. So goal one, just to sort of refresh council, was to facilitate, you know, if we think back to the actual implementation report, there are a number of different roles that local government can take on, but one of the most sort of traditional and well-established roles is to facilitate housing development. And you do that through your official community plan, through your policy development, and then of course the associated regulatory responsibilities that you have through things like your zoning bylaw. And so here, this goal is really looking at, you know, what can the town do to create a development context that is conducive to the right type of housing, and what sort of incentives and supports can be put into place to ensure that as development takes place, whether it's infill or new subdivisions, that the kind of housing that's being brought online, at least in part, is really geared towards addressing some of the gaps that the needs report identifies. So recommendation 1.1, this is an ongoing piece that is already established. The town already uses housing agreements. So this is just sort of acknowledging that work, but also acknowledging that because of the nature of ongoing housing agreements, there's a kind of staff monitoring responsibility here to make sure that they're being adhered to if especially if units are being acquired through these housing agreements. Strategy 1.2 or item 1.2 is looking at inclusionary zoning policies or other policies to integrate universal, accessible, or adaptable design into new developments. And I'll just take a moment to point towards some other examples. In the Lower Mainland, we see, you know, communities as far as Chilliwack looking at or having implemented these items. Burnaby has implemented this, where they require that, you know, anywhere from sort of 10% to 50% of new multifamily housing is anywhere from adaptable design, which means that units are roughed in to be readily adapted to be accessible. So, for example, the kinds of framing supports, wider doorways, etc., that can make a unit very easily changed into a fully or universally accessible unit. And typically they put that requirement into place on all new multifamily. And then they also offer an incentive with it where they do a little bit of density bonusing where common spaces are waived or provided as a density bonus to support the development of that and offset the costs for developers. We do also know that adaptable design is often recognized as one of those things that can be quite easy to do at new construction. And it doesn't necessarily significantly impact a developer's pro forma. But if you're trying to renovate an older unit that hasn't had any of that accessible or adaptable building take place, it's a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult. And so this is really, looking at over time building a stock of housing that is suitable for seniors to age in place and to support individuals that have accessibility issues. Moving further down the list. For new secondary suites, considering using Section 219 covenants, and these are requirements that secondary suites that are newly developed become long-term rental housing. This is something that local governments do have the power to do using these Section 219 covenants. It's not something we necessarily see a lot of, but given our context as a tourist-based community. And I know there's been lots of discussion about short-term vacation rentals and regulating them. One of the measures that the town could consider, either as a blanket policy or in targeted areas that are less suitable to kind of tourism or short-term vacation rental, is using those covenants where new secondary suites are being developed to support ensuring that secondary suites remain in the long-term rental housing stock. So again, this is a shorter term item, again, a one-time staff policy that would need to be developed, but there may be a bit more consideration as to what the geographical implications or considerations might be on how it's applied. And then connected to that, in terms of thinking more about our infill and density and how we're kind of maintaining the form and character of our community while at the same time recognizing the need for a diversity of housing options. Council can consider allowing both secondary suites and garden suites in appropriate neighborhoods where they're supported by servicing and even define affordability levels where units are incentivized. And sorry, that recommendation number 9, that's a holdover from the previous version of the document, but it does refer back to, I think the next one is incentives for garden suites and secondary suites. So again, this would be probably linked to 1.3, kind of a one-time staff policy and a shorter time frame. So we can move to the next slide. So the town can also look at something that it's increasingly being considered is the use of pre-zoning in order to allow for specific kinds of, whether it's, it can be everything from infill density all the way up to multifamily to try to get priority housing types. Often what we see when it comes to pre-zoning in the infill density context is 1.5 being related to 1.4, where you blanket pre-zone certain appropriate single family zones. You'd want to create geographic criteria, probably size on the lot criteria, as well as servicing criteria, to allow for more flexible options. And an example of this is the city of Kelowna, who implemented right around the downtown core. They had a number of single family dwellings and lots that were then upzoned in a kind of blanket pre-zoning to allow for fourplexes. This went alongside of a design competition where a couple of winning submissions to the design competition allowed for sort of pre-designed homes with an expedited building permit process if you were going with one of those sort of pre-approved design types. And so, I think in the case of Gibsons, maybe looking not so much at the quadplex, but at the threeplex, which is, secondary suite and garden suite alongside of a main dwelling might be appropriate. And so really the sort of 1.3, 1.4 and 1.5 are all connected in terms of thinking about this kind of gentle density and infill and ensuring that it's serving the community's sort of long-term rental housing needs. The interesting thing about the Kelowna program is that their zoning allows for both strata in the quadplexes, so they can be divvied up and sold off, but they also allow an owner to redevelop and rent out the remaining suites. So it can be either kind of a retirement strategy for aging in place and reducing the reducing the maintenance requirements that you have on your own unit, or it can be a strategy for kind of getting that gentle density where you're divvying it up and doing a strata on it. 1.6 is looking at considering using inclusionary zoning to require a minimum of units in new developments to be affordable rental or attainable home ownership. And so these are typically secured through both a policy development and then housing agreements. And in the case of affordable home ownership, we may be restricted to buyers that have an income threshold that they meet, or are sort of purchased by an affordable housing agency in the context of the affordable rental. And so inclusionary zoning, just as a bit of a recap for council, is when it's sort of, I like to think of density bonusing and inclusionary zoning as a little bit of the carrot and the stick. And so density bonusing provides a bonus to developers where if you increase the density on a lot, they're required to contribute something to the community, typically in the form of green space or affordable housing contribution or a cash in lieu. Inclusionary zoning is typically implemented as a way of saying developers must provide a set threshold of units that are affordable. And these can range from anywhere from sort of 5% of total units to 20% of the total units, depending on the development environment and the development context and of course the municipal context. So this is something that would require a bit more work on the part of staff, is probably a medium-term objective, in that setting up a policy, probably a little bit of background land economics work to determine what is an appropriate threshold that's not going to deter development partners and yet will lead to some units. And so typically some calibration of the policy is required and some further engagement with the development sector. But it does have the opportunity to be also a moderate impact in that, over time, these kinds of policies can result in, a decent number of units being brought on board that don't necessarily, because they often come in at that kind of below market or low end of market and then have restrictions on how much rent can be bumped up. They both, they have some affordability over the long term, and they don't necessarily always require senior government funding to acquire them. And then, as I had mentioned, so 1.6 and 1.7, density bonusing. This is, again, more of sort of the incentive side of things, considering expanding the use of the density bonusing beyond live, work, and CDA 2 zones to other zones near the town center. And so, part of the thinking here is that the density bonusing, because it's an incentive, really still encourages a lot of the growth to take place in and near the town center, whereas the inclusionary zoning component just ensures that anybody that's further away from the town center is still doing their fair contribution. And in the case, again, of Kelowna, where they implemented something similar, they actually structured their inclusionary zoning so that it was away from their town center and was solely a cash in lieu program. So all the cash goes into their affordable housing reserve. But what it means is that developers that are developing on the outskirts of the community are still paying in and being asked to contribute, but they're doing so in such a way that units aren't getting developed out there. Now our town's quite a bit smaller. And so, I think what's considered the downtown core and what's not can be somewhat debated. So I think, around the highway and parts of Lower Gibson's density bonusing may be appropriate. And some of the undeveloped properties on the edge of town around Reed Road, for example, may be more suitable to look at some kind of inclusionary zoning, particularly if we're looking at more of a single family or a low density kind of environment, thinking about how that inclusionary zoning can contribute to either a housing reserve fund or a certain kind of affordable ownership that might be appropriate to the location. Again, both of these two probably intimately connected, medium term, moderate impact, but set the stage for long-term, the long-term development direction of the town, and insofar as it fits in with affordable housing. So it's, you know, it's not likely to be the kind of policy that results in immediate gains over the short term, but once it's put into place, has the ability to kind of chart the course over the long term and result in, you know, some significant or at least moderate to significant unit contributions that can help us, at least, even if we're not catching up on the deep need that we have in our community, at least keeping up with the growth and changes that we're seeing. 1.8 is identifying or pre-zoning sites for future shelter, supportive housing, and rental developments. You know, we have a new supportive housing that's just been opened in Gibsons, and you know, I think it's probably a good time to kind of take a pause and see how that impacts the homelessness figures on the Sunshine Coast, and work with BC Housing to think about what other supports, such as scattered site housing and rental supplements, can continue to support those individuals who are at risk or experiencing homelessness that aren't served by supportive housing. But over the long term, I think it's, you know, it's sort of good to consider how certain sites may be, you know, maybe more or less appropriate for this type of supportive housing, particularly because we know that those types of housing related to homelessness can be quite controversial and can lead to significant community debate. So this is a long-term strategy. Again, you know, it's a moderate to high insofar as right now we don't need hundreds and hundreds of units to support the homeless population. We're hopefully going to be well served by the 40 units that have just been developed in town, and some wraparound programs. And so, you know, I think, but that it remains to be seen, you know, what the long-term impacts of the housing crisis may continue to be on the coast. So I think we can move to the next page now, Leslie Ann. So goal number 2 is really, you know, this sort of new role that local governments are taking on, which is more on the investment and the incentivization side of housing policy. You know, I think we tried to design these recommendations with an eye to the fact that the town, you know, every municipality in the province, but particularly smaller communities, have limited resources, both in terms of staff and in terms of, you know, what's realistic to expect in terms of expenditures and investments over the next 10 years or so, simply because there are many competing priorities, whether it be water, sustainability, climate, housing. So again, incentives tend to be a lower cost item in terms of long-term requirements from local government. So incentivizing the development of secondary suites and garden suites and lock-off suites, and then linking back above and requiring some long-term rentals and affordability where those incentives may be applied. These incentives can be everything from a really sort of gentle piece, which we're seeing some communities do, which is waiving any additional utility fees on secondary suites or garden suites for, say, a 5 to 10 year period, which provides that kind of low and gentle incentivization program to actual rebate programs, which we've seen in Ontario have had some moderate success, where homeowners are renovating their home to provide a secondary suite. Local governments may provide more in the form of actual cash contribution. Now, we've seen that tried in other communities, primarily some northern ones, with limited success. So it's something that I think would warrant careful attention, but certainly something as simple as kind of waiving the utilities fees on new secondary suites may be one of those ways to spur development, and especially when you couple it with sort of long-term rental requirements. And you know, again, there are geographic considerations around where is appropriate within town to kind of implement that, coupled with a short-term vacation rental policy that may allow for those, but ensures that short-term vacation rentals are kind of paying their fair share of the requirements towards towards the additional service costs that come with tourists, I think is probably kind of a dovetailed policy approach. Again, kind of a shorter term, 1 to 2 years, but given that it's wrapped in with a couple of other things, maybe on the long end of that 2-year program. Considering regular established contributions to the Affordable Housing Reserve, and in particular that may not be directly linked to the development market. So this is very strongly linked to a couple of things, a couple of other items in this implementation framework. One is the CAC policy update, which is not a direct, it is a developer ask, and that should be noted, but it's not a project by project negotiation that takes place, which is, as I think has sort of been what the town has undertaken historically. Is every project's a little bit different. So by setting a consistent CAC policy, you're doing the work of fundamentally leveling the playing field for developers and ensuring that they're contributing beyond, it's beyond affordable housing, because the CAC isn't just for affordable housing, but ensuring that they understand that sort of what is expected, and that's clear. And that's a really important thing that we hear from developers, is that that the policies are clear and consistent and fairly applied in terms of those types of things. The other thing that this piece is related to is the conversation around a regional housing fund, which is one of the regional recommendations, and is certainly a much longer term piece. And that is, looking at the development of a regional service, whereby, much like our library services, our resident tax base, or our property owning tax base, would be taxed a small amount on an annual basis in order to feed into either a regional fund. I mean, the town could implement this on its own, but given the sort of proposal, at least in the implementation report, that this take place on a regional basis, it may be that sort of loops in with some of the town priorities and links up with it with how you're building and developing your affordable housing reserve. So this is a key one to kind of think in terms of, what are the short and medium term needs for the town, but also that longer term piece of the regional fund. 2.3 is continuing to offer development incentives like DCC reimbursements or waivers, tax exemptions to priority projects. So this is something the town's already undertaking with the Franklin Road and the Shaw Road projects. We find that in terms of actual financial feasibility on a small project that can have a decent sized impact, can make a change. When you get into a larger project like the Shaw Road, it's less about having a massive impact on the pro forma and seeing huge changes to affordability, as it is sort of signaling to senior government that municipalities or local governments are fully on board with the project. They're showing that there's support from the staff level and the council level within the municipality. Again, this is a kind of a shorter term piece with kind of an existing policy. It's really probably about formalizing that policy and some of the work that's already been done on it. And then, finally, like a communications piece, as some of these are developed and wrapped into formal policy, and that work is kind of wrapped up within 1 to 2 years, is just a simple kind of communications piece. We've seen the city of Kamloops, for example, has long had a developers incentive package that they keep at their front counter that shows both the incentives and supports that the municipality provides, as well as some of the programming that's in place from senior government to support a range of different housing types. And particularly in smaller communities, our development community may not always be aware of, for example, the new rental construction financing program through CMHC, which has quite favorable long-term amortization periods, 40 to 50 years typically, so very patient money, combined with quite favorable interest rates, and some gentle affordability requirements that help capture some affordable units in a community and keep them affordable long term, while also sort of allowing the developer to meet their typical kind of investment and return on investment that their funders would require, or their investors would require. And so an incentive package like that is is really, you know, the $2 signs there are less about the development of the package and more about all the work that goes into the front end of that and developing the policies in the couple of years leading up to it. But it's kind of a low-hanging fruit to communicate because you do see so many people as a local government. Everybody's coming into the office, whether it's the nonprofit sector or the development sector, and so really clearly communicating what the town is doing and what the town plans to do, and what other government levels are doing to support a variety of different kinds of housing, including the affordable home ownership piece, can be really important to smaller developers in a community like ours that may not be tapped into everything. So I think we can move to the next page, Leslie Ann. So just the last couple of items on this. I think, so this is linked back again. Density bonusing is connected to both the facilitating and the incentivizing. So this is the same piece. It's linked. It's essentially the same action, but recognizing that the use of density bonusing is an incentive on the town's part. And then finally, the item that I've already mentioned here, which is considering establishing a regional housing service that dovetails with municipal reserve funds to fund regional initiatives. And this is, I think, one of the few items in this long list that is a high impact item. It's also a long-term item because we understand that in order to engage with the regional district and the district of Sechelt and potentially even the Sechelt Nation, if there was interest there, is a an important process that's going to involve framing out how that regional fund is managed, how the criteria for application to the fund are applied, what is a reasonable new tax burden to apply to our residents, and what are some of the priority housing types that would need to be focused on through that fund. I will say that there are two examples of this kind of regional housing fund that have been developed just across the Salish Sea from us. One is in Cowichan Valley, and the other one's in Comox Valley. So the Cowichan Valley is probably the best one for our purposes to be looking at because they do a broad-based regional housing service that's intended to provide funds from everything from emergency and supportive housing all the way up to kind of near market. And I think they even look at affordable home ownership as one of their priority areas. So they're really looking at the whole continuum of affordable housing. Now they've structured their fund to flow through a single nonprofit entity. There's no reason why this would need to be the case. I think given the fact that we have quite a number of great nonprofits on the Sunshine Coast doing work in the housing sphere, from Pender Harbor all the way out to Port Mellon, or at least to the town of Gibsons and area around it, that setting up a fund that local nonprofits can apply to and receive funds from if they're serving kind of priority needs and adhering to certain criteria might be a better way to go to set up that type of fund. But generally, the principle for the fund is that the majority of the dollars there are for the acquisition of land and capital costs and development. And the reason that this is ranked as a high impact and frankly a high resource action is because it is it's one of the few things that local governments may be able to do to really rebuild our local control over how these priority housing types are built that go beyond kind of facilitating development and regulating. So much of the housing that we're talking about through these measures needs to be funded through senior government, through capital investments, through operating subsidies, through financing programs. But the development of a regional housing service has the opportunity, even if it was only limited to the acquisition of land, that could be in and of itself, could be kind of a game changer for the opportunities to develop new housing on the Sunshine Coast. If the fund, feasibility work obviously would need to be conducted. But if the fund was able to provide funds for both acquisition of land and capital investments, then all of a sudden we're talking about making choices about what we want to build here on the Sunshine Coast outside of government dollars and outside of senior government dollars. And then we can say to senior government, well, we're going ahead with this project anyways. You should come and join us, rather than being dictated to by relatively restrictive sort of funding pools that are very yeah, they're sort of very well defined and very well boxed in, and don't always sort of meet the local criteria or local needs fully. So I think, I recognize that this is a big, ultimately probably a big political ask, but fundamentally one that I think could have a big impact in our region in terms of really being able to take some control over what we see as priority housing types. I think we can move to the next page. I think we're coming to the last couple of goals here. So goal 3 is convening partnerships and advocating for existing housing needs and educating communities to support priority housing. These are all ongoing initiatives in various ways, shapes, and forms. Continuing to partner with BC Housing and the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society, which the town is already doing. To deliver new housing, considering new partnerships such as what can industry bring. We know that there is a need for workforce housing and employee housing, and at the same time, we don't have very many big businesses whose employees are struggling with that. It may be more the smaller to mid-sized businesses. So what are the solutions that can maybe be innovated there? Exploring partnership opportunities to expand shelter and short-term supportive housing for individuals, or increasing the number of beds in existing seasonal shelter. And I should add to that one, and considering the options for sort of decentralized supports for the right kinds of clients. I mentioned earlier scattered site housing, which is often used for individuals that need fewer supports than supportive housing, but may still need kind of some outreach on a weekly or a couple times a week basis. And that's, that's sort of as a partnership opportunity. This isn't necessarily something that the town would be driving, but more sort of that the town would continue to be a partner in, as you've been a partner with the short-term shelter over the last couple of years, and finding spaces for it and supporting it. But, it's being driven by Cac and senior government funders. And the third one here is, engaging with BC Housing, neighboring municipalities in the regional district and the Squamish Nation to discuss what the opportunities are across the board for housing. I'm sure council is aware, but the Squamish Nation is about to undertake a comprehensive community planning process on all their lands across their traditional territories, which includes the Checkwell Reserve on the border of the town of Gibsons. I believe that work, it may still be in the RFP process, but I think they're receiving proposals for it now. But we know that they'll be undertaking that work over the next year or two. And so, finding ways to engage with them through that work, finding ways to engage with the regional district, who is currently undertaking a regional background work to regional growth strategy. And I know your director of planning has been involved in that. Those are all important considerations and ongoing kind of regional cooperation for how housing gets developed. And again, these are all ongoing, so relatively, low investment requirements from a staff perspective. But yeah, we can move to the next page now, Leslie Ann. And then advocacy. Again, this is a pretty strong political role, and a role for local government or local government mayors and councils to take on through venues such as UBCM, but also direct meetings with ministers or deputy ministers, depending on the focus of the advocacy, to talk about what investment looks like on the Sunshine Coast in the form of housing programs and supports. And that's everything for support for the community services proposed development in Seashelt to serve women and children, to ongoing advocacy to the Affordable Housing Society, who are working so hard on the Shaw Road development. And then finally here, considering partnering with regional partners to create a permanent part-time cross-governmental position for convening housing interests. And that says the Shishal and the Squamish First Nations. I think in terms of engaging with the Squamish First Nation, important to better understand what their own presence and engagement on the coast may be. I know that currently they're quite focused on a number of their North Shore reserve communities in developing housing for their membership. So, but important to invite them to the conversation for sure. But considering what what a social planning or a housing coordinator position might look like. Now, I know there is another emergency housing meeting, I believe it's next Monday, and there's been ongoing work behind the scenes led by that consortium of partners. So I think that conversation is happening and should continue. So it's hopefully a short-term conversation to happen, but does or may require permanent new staffing, whether that's situated at the regional district or at a third-party organization or body, of course, remains to be seen, but an important conversation to keep moving forward. And then finally, goal 4 is supporting social equity. Social equity is a deep and complex sort of lens that we can put on pretty much any policy development project that we take on. But in this case, I think that the town has an opportunity in that it's looking at kind of updating the OCP to integrate a social equity lens into the OCP update as it moves ahead in the next year or two. And so that, of course, is going to have a much longer term timeline in terms of the implementation. If you're looking at building it into your OCP and then having it filter down into all of your policy development. But it does have the opportunity to really kind of change the way that we think about the way that we develop policy on the Sunshine Coast and in the town of Gibsons. And I believe we're at the end of that report at this point. So I will stop talking. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Matt, thank you. Well presented, very thorough, overwhelming. And I appreciate that. I guess I'll go to council for questions, obviously, and there's an awful lot to unpack here, and I look at it and I say, how and what first, what next, and how do we move forward with it? If we were to choose 3 or 4 items that realistically our council could attain, or is this a matter of just putting all this in place and waiting for the next proposal to come forward and seeing how that proposal fits? We have a limited staffing capacity, limited ability to be proactive. In other words, to reaching out because frankly, staff are fully occupied with all the applications we have today, which really keeps everything busy. One question I had right off the top, and I see Councillor Crowell's hand as well, but one question I had is talk about pro formas. What is the relevance of pro formas today that might have been, I mean, let's take, for example, the project on Shaw Road, planned, conceived, planned, probably costed out 3 years ago. What's the relevance of that cost today? As opposed to when it was approved to move forward?
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, I think one of the challenges around development, pro forma development in the current context is the sheer cost of like the increased cost of construction materials, in particular wood, that we've seen, which is driven by, I'm not an economic expert on sort of building materials, but from what I understand anecdotally, may be driven by both sort of market capitalizing on people doing a lot of home renovation, but also the housing boom in itself that we've seen surprisingly since the pandemic started. So yeah, a pro forma that's developed 3-4 years ago is not going to capture some of those changes. But at the same time, when we use a pro forma to inform policy, to build up something like, we use them, for example, in our work to develop inclusionary housing policies, and say, what's reasonable for a developer to undertake versus what's going to push them too hard or be a disincentive. And so, we can really only do the best that we have with the information that we have at any given time when it comes to policy development. And when it comes to the nonprofit sector, I think development consultants like New Commons, who are working with the Affordable Housing Society, I would hope be updating their pro forma to reflect current conditions as they move ahead with applications. So if they're in conversation with BC Housing or CMHC around further funding for the Shaw Road project, I know that they submitted an application to the latest round to BC Housing. That pro forma probably would have been updated at the end of last year. To be reflective of kind of changes to the building and cost environment.
Give you an example that last week we at the regional district, we considered the upgrades required for the seashell pool. The issue regarding the sprinkler system. In February, the consulting engineer to the district seashell informed them that the estimated cost of that project would be $180,000. That was February. They went out for bids. They got one tender, $725,000, based upon the escalating price of steel, the one commodity. So when you have a building that has to be sprinklered, you look at that and say, wow, that the simple cost of that escalation of that one component in that project, and obviously the SCRD has to rethink how to approach that, because coming up with a $725,000 budget. So anyway, I have other questions, but I'll go to Councillor Kroll next.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish, and thank you for the report, Matt, and for staff for organizing it. As Mayor Beamish said, it was sort of like, we were hit with a fire hose of information, but I really do appreciate that you have managed to synthesize so much of it into concise points. One of the things that occurs to me that is potentially hampering us in moving forward with any of this is the fact we don't have a short-term rental bylaw in place. A lot of the things that you mentioned are contingent on landlords knowing, is it practical to go forward with a short-term rental, or should I say, hey, let's go back to having the tenant in the downstairs suite? So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would behoove us to sort of get a policy in place so landlords and potential people that are considering putting in a garden suite know where they're at. And it also gives us a groundwork to move forward with. Would that assumption on my part be correct?
Yeah, I would say that there's certainly strong linkages between many of the secondary suite items that were in that list and understanding how they might be applied. Some of the ones around the new, like development of new secondary suites, might be treated differently or outside the short-term vacation rental. But I do think that clarity on who and where, who can run short-term vacation rentals and where, would provide all folks that are running those on the coast a bit more certainty on what what the future of those units is, and certainly dovetail with the secondary suite policies or recommendations here.
And just sort of further to that, partnerships are interesting. Councillor Ladwig and I and our CAO, who is on leave right now, we've been working with the Legion. And, there's a huge potential there with what zoning they have on part of their property and potential zoning opportunities on the balance of the property. But then you run into their own command, which seems to be, and how do you get around those stumbling blocks?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and it's totally contingent on the kind of partnership you're talking about. The Legion, I mean, I know that of the Legion because I'd sort of worked with the Pender Harbor Seniors Housing, and they had looked a number of years ago at the Legion property there and ran into exactly the same issue, that the command Legion command was the stumbling block. I mean, there, I think it becomes part of that's an advocacy role at the political level, certainly to try to engage with command. The other is sort of understanding those structures of partnerships. because it's going to look different if you partner with the Legion versus if you partner with the school district, for example. The school district was, they were on our working committee for the housing needs report and the implementation framework. Nick Westwick, who's the treasurer for the school board, was a representative. And, I think one of the areas that we're seeing right across the province interest in is school districts and their ability to kind of free up land. And they have their own set of sort of financial and fiduciary responsibilities dependent on who acquired the land, whether it was the province or the school district independently. So certainly I think, every partnership comes with its own set of quirks and potential roadblocks. And I think, the role of council in those cases is often to advocate or speak at a political level, a sort of leader to leader level, to advocate for good usage. And I've put the offer out to the school board to come and present to them as well around some of the needs and just talk to them a little bit about, what are school districts considering? Because we are seeing this shift as a major landholder in school districts and their interest in this housing space, and not just for their own teachers, but also for the communities that they serve as a whole. So.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Councillor Ladwig, then Councillor Lumley.
First of all, thank you, Director of Planning, for bringing this back to the table. Developing a housing strategy for the town of Gibsons was a really big item during our election, and it's a piece of work that I really want to see done during our term. So thank you. I'm really glad to see it come back. And thank you, Matt, for doing such an in-depth dive into the recommendations that we could incorporate into a strategy. These recommendations are great, and I don't have issues with any of them. I think it's a really good and important piece of work. My only I guess for me, what I'm struggling with right now is I don't necessarily see what we've got here as a strategy. I see it as a list of recommendations, albeit effective and good recommendations for us to consider. But for me, a strategy requires a number of things. Like, it should be time bound. There should be performance mechanisms built into it. Like, it's brought back to council every 1 or 2 years for review to see how we're implementing them. The recommendations outlined in the strategy should be prioritized, and that should be based on our capacity, like Mayor Beamish said. So even though all these recommendations are listed, we're not prioritizing what we can get done and when. And because it's not time bound, we can say that one item takes 1 to 2 years or 3 to 4 years. But if we just put this on the shelf tomorrow and don't pick it up for the next 4, the 1 to 2 year items won't get done for 6. And so I do think that a strategy needs to have more structure around it. I also think that I hoped that our strategy that we develop will also serve as a bit of an educational tool, where, like, ideally in my mind, we would have a checkbox structured based on the different housing types in the housing continuum, and we would show how each of these recommendations support which housing type, because then it gives us a good impression as to where's our effort going. Is it going into are we heavy on one end of the spectrum, or the housing continuum, versus the other? And a number of these actions, like putting in a secondary suite, for example, not only does it provide, hopefully, rental opportunities, but it also makes home ownership more realistic for people trying to enter into the homeowner market, because they get mortgage subsidies. And so on a checklist that was, show the different housing types, you could check off both those housing types as being supported by this action. And I think it's important for us to get a good picture of how these recommendations support which part of the housing continuum. Just a few other quick comments. I agree with, I was hoping that I'd like to see our strategy highlight all the important work that we've already accomplished. I think the town of Gibsons has been really successful in getting a lot of things done for affordable housing that people aren't aware of. And I think we should be showcasing that we've got the Franklin Road projects, we've got the supportive housing project. We are in the process of working on a short-term rental bylaw, but we just haven't quite got there yet, but that needs to be highlighted. We don't talk about whether or not as a community we support the vacancy tax. That's something that seems to be missing to me in my mind. What else do I have? That might be it for now. So I do think that, and then the other thing I wanted to say is, did we budget to have more of a fulsome workshop around the development of our strategy? I thought we did. So I'm kind of looking to Mayor Beamish and or maybe Leslie Ann.
We did have a little bit of a budget to support affordable housing projects, but not a full budget around preparing a housing strategy. So we did apply for that grant for the housing needs assessment, and then we built in a budget to do some follow-up work for the policy work, and then we had a little bit allocated for this year to just finish it off, but not for a full housing strategy.
Mhm.
But I mean, the housing needs report and the implementation was the work that was going to feed into the strategy.
Yeah, exactly, which I'm really pleased with and glad that we did that. Anyways, I just feel like this is a great sort of appendix to the strategy. Like, this is a great list of recommendations. It is the meat of it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But there's a bunch of preamble and conclusion work kind of around it that it needs to set the content. There needs to be more context around it, I feel. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Lumley, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Mine's on funding, and I know there's a couple instances of reference to, like, obviously, a town contributing into an affordable housing fund that isn't directly related to development, and any funding for the regional housing service. I mean, on a town that's going to get hit with a pretty large bill for policing and obviously being affordable would also include not taxing people to death. But and you might not know the answer to this, but has there been any discussion of, like, maybe communities that are impacted through, like, their housing is impacted through the fact that they are tourism based communities, and clearly there's a correlation between long-term rentals and short-term rental. Is there any, like, what about the MRDT? Is the province ever, or has anybody ever questioned whether or not some of these funds, these taxes collected from tourists, could be returned to the communities in the form of contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund? Or
Yeah, great question. I mean, I have heard that idea floated, never by the province themselves, but having tourism dollars reinvested in sort of island coastal communities that are heavily tourism based, I think makes sense. Again, that's sort of an advocacy piece that I think politically it makes sense to make the case for, because I think you're correct in sort of pointing out, if they're collecting those dollars, they're not returning them to our community. They're not necessarily, or the way that they return them to our community doesn't relate to how our communities might be impacted by certain effects of tourism. So it's certainly, I think, a way that would make sense, but it may also be, one that would require some pretty significant conversations with the province, and probably an alliance that goes beyond our regional district alone.
Thanks.
I actually believe that taxation does go through the regional district, and I think they're using part of that to offset the cost for a regional coordinator, housing coordinator.
Okay.
For housing. I think that's part of what they're doing. So it doesn't come back to the town itself, but it goes to the regional district. And I think that between tourism and the regional district, they are providing those funds to support the initiation of a regional housing coordinator.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that. Okay.
Pretty sure that's Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thanks for the strategy. I think it's a compact piece and it's easy to grab, but I agree with Councillor Ledwig. To me, I saw this as it's not the start of the project, the process, because we start a little bit before, but this is kind of still in the middle of the process. And I think we need to integrate this with, have actually integrated planning, as Matthew, as you said, how much this would impact other areas. So I think it's very important to integrate and look at more comprehensive. For example, obviously there are certain things that to me here is a no-brainer. Yes, let's do right now. But anything that has to do with density, I feel a little bit concerned because, we right now, we are waiting for a report from our water supply, the state of our supply, what's happening. I think we need to understand exactly where we are, what's our capacity, our carrying capacity, in order to say, okay, that's the level we can reach with certainty, and not run out in the near future with all these projects already lined up. Another thing that I think about it, there are projects that they deliver affordable housing. For example, the one in Shaw Road, I know it has been a little bit challenging, but I'm confident that we're gonna get financed and it will deliver affordable housing. While secondary suites, we don't know. But they still impact our resources, right? Whether they impact roads, they impact our water consumption, and we need to be aware. So I agree. I see that there's a recommendation that incorporate the town housing strategy in a future update of the OCP, but I think the update of the OCP has to be tied up with this impact assessment, right? To this comprehensive and integrated planning where we can, because we need certainty. We are at the time that we need a little bit of certainty. You know, we have financial struggles. We don't know what's going to be ahead in terms of the economic landscape. And I think, but at the same time, the housing needs probably is going to become even worse. So I'm not saying, no, it is important that we don't abandon this in face of the difficulties, but I think it is important that we embrace with a really critical point of view and to say, yeah, how can in this challenging situation deliver what we can? So I agree, there has to be a little bit of work and we can really understand. One thing that perhaps you can give me some feedback on that. On May 11, I was at the intergovernmental meeting and the SRD announced that they are creating a regional housing service. So my understanding that's what they said, that they would be actively involved in the development of housing. So that's another thing we should integrate with, because, well, first it makes more sense because the SRD has more land. Another thing is, you know, if it's something close to Gibsons, our aquifer is not really, even though we call Gibson's aquifer, it's not Gibson's aquifer. We should call something else because area E uses and area F also draws water from the aquifer. Perhaps we've increased, perhaps Langdale is a logical place for growth. Are they gonna use water from the Gibson's aquifers? We have to consider all this. So I will be interested if you are aware of the SRD. And yeah, and also I think there's also, you know, density brings, at the end of the day, growth brings increase in taxes. And I think we also have to consider that. You know, Vancouver is a good example, right? The city grew a lot and nevertheless becomes even more difficult to live in Vancouver. And now people are coming here, and we can see this happening, you know, the effect. So how do we understand the mechanism, and is there anything that we can do, right? Because theoretical things, you know, many things, you know, the list here is great. It's almost like, okay, this is the package, but like Councilor Ludwig said, how can we implement this and really attain the goals, right? So I think this is the challenge that we are facing.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard that about the regional district. I did put an offer into them. I was on leave at the beginning of the year, parental leave for a couple months, and contacted them when I got back with an offer to present to them, and didn't hear back from them. So I haven't kept fully up to date on where the SCRD is at on that regional housing service. That's very interesting to hear. Yeah, with regards to, you know, packaging the strategy, well, I'll talk with your director of planning about sort of augmenting some of these pieces and how we can kind of support the elements that you're talking about. And with regards to the density, it's a challenging issue, but we do know that lower density communities are harder to maintain and service in terms of infrastructure, simply because we're spread out in cost. And so I think there's a balance to be maintained over sort of over densifying versus kind of keeping up with population growth and keeping it contained rather than allowing it to spread out to green spaces.
I believe at the regional district level, what you're looking at is that they are going to provide, as I say, some of the tourism revenues to support the regional housing strategy that is ongoing right now. And Councillor Kroll has actually volunteered to be liaison to that committee for the town on that. And but I think that we have a practice of receiving kind of good reports and sending people off down rabbit holes to chase more information and never actually getting them adopted. And I'm just wondering where we could go with something like this that should bring it back in our agenda, in a timely way. I could see us not seeing this again till fall, given that we only have 2 more meetings to go and many things on the Director of Planning's list to be dealt with. And seeing some issues on here that seem to make sense and seem to be doable in a short term, such as 1.3, new secondary suites or garden suite consider used in section 219 covenants. That just makes good sense to enter into a 219 covenant with a owner. There's negotiation around that. They'll want something back, but we shouldn't have to wait until the whole report is adopted as a whole to be able to implement some practical things. And that's what I'd like to see us do and say, okay, that while we're working on fine tuning, are there things that we should be bringing forward and saying, okay, this is actually going to be our practice. Another one I marked is expanding density infill. A number of things on here had to do with zoning, and I wonder if we shouldn't actually be, and when we're going to be looking at a more of a comprehensive rezoning document and incorporate a number of these things into that process as opposed to one-off issues on zoning. Inventory new or existing development incentives. Regional housing service. I think that's what we're doing at the regional level right now with the District of Sechelt and town. So that's being looked at. I think that some of the things we talked about, continued partnership with the BC Housing, Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing, consider new partnerships with the industry. Looking at one of our issues on the whole area of workforce housing is not necessarily for business as much as it is for attracting and retaining the police, healthcare workers, other first responders, supporting them in getting established in the community and retaining them in the community. Businesses, as you say, seem to be doing okay, but those areas. So I think there's a number of areas we should be looking at, but I'd like to see how we can say, okay, we're going to continue working on this, but hey, here's 3 that we can actually do while we're continuing to work on it, and maybe those are some things that the Section 219 covenant. Councillor Kroll had a recent case, I think, mentioned. That would have been a good opportunity in that particular case. Councillor Kroll? Yeah, you're muted, Dave.
Thank you, sir. I did inquire at the time whether there was something that we could register a covenant on title, but because the application was through form and character, we couldn't. So I think the 219, we are somewhat restricted as to where we can apply it. I think if it's a zoning or a variance, there would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director of Planning, if it's a variance or a zoning change, then we could levy the 219. But if it's just the form and character, then too bad, so sad. It's not going to happen today.
Yeah, that's correct. So we could look at a zoning amendment to look at how secondary suites or short-term rentals would be regulated and limit the uses allowed or the tenure even. So that could be done through a zoning amendment, but unfortunately not through a form and character UP.
Yeah.
But what council might want to have a workshop on this topic to discuss prioritizing the action items recommended in the housing strategy. The report does, in the next steps part of the report, it says following the endorsement of this housing strategy, council would need to prioritize which items to work on. So that could be the follow-up or the next step.
Yeah, I think that we need to work on something, and we also need to finish off our short-term rental bylaw, which to me is almost a 2022 implementation now, but we need to deal with that. So, Councilor Diandrad, then Councilor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with you. I even have marked here already the ones that I think, no, this we can do right now. I think my concern is like I said, with the water issue that we are facing, but at the same time, we are having a reporting coming very soon. So this is not going to take too much of a timeline. At the same time, we have an OCP schedule. I think my only concern with the zoning amendment all the time is because, you know, we are not doing really a comprehensive planning, and you create these tensions in the community. But if we are planning to have an OCP amendment, I think these are things that we can, you know, be facilitated by the OCP amendment. And I think once we understand, it's very easy to come up with a series of these items to implement. So,
Director of Planning, when would you see the availability to do a workshop with council on this issue?
I would have to connect with Matt to find out what his availability for that is, but we could try and get one scheduled in July before the August break, if that works for Matt as well.
Yeah, let's talk after. I have 1 week where I'm off in July, but generally around. So
yeah,
okay.
I think that's important. I think we just can't keep on going and doing further studies. I think we have to say, okay, we have something to work with. Yes, we'll put some more framework around it, but let's also move forward with some action items. Councilor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I don't know whether it's too much to throw into the mix, but we've referenced the short-term rental bylaw, and, you know, we've pretty well, you know, missed the tourist season this year. So, you know, business license revenues lost, so on and so forth. And it's leaving a lot of people just sort of dangling. So I think a lot of the housing strategy springboards off of what is the policy in place for the short-term rentals. So I would really like to see us iron out something with respect to short-term rentals, bring the bylaw forward and put a caveat in it that it'll be reviewed in 6 months, as we did with the tree bylaw. But too many people are, you know, our correspondence files, there's letters, what's happening with the short-term rental bylaw? You know, it's, you know, it may be a double-edged sword working in favor of us, that I know people have considered buying properties in Gibsons to run as a short-term rental and haven't, because there isn't a bylaw. They don't know whether, if they buy it now, all of a sudden they've got a house that they can't run as a short-term bylaw. So I think it's really important that we get the short-term bylaw, the short-term rental bylaw dealt with. And if we can integrate it with moving forward with the housing resolution, obviously Matt's indicated a lot of low-hanging fruit. And as Councillor D'Andretti said, some of the stuff you're probably doing already. But a lot of it is also contingent on the OCP, because otherwise we're going to be spot rezoning, which is not necessarily bad, but there's all the cost and time involved with spot rezoning, where if it's done with community engagement with an OCP review, it may put us in a better stead not to have all the feedback, you know, on every single issue. We've got, you know, letters of complaint and people screaming foul, and the villagers arriving with their pitchforks and torches, that they're not happy with what we're doing, you know, because it's becoming piecemeal. It's not part of a bigger plan. So I would like to see us get some teeth into the short-term rental and then springboard off it with the housing, with an overview of how it could impact on a review of the OCP. Not dump too much in your lap all at once.
I guess the question is it realistic that we could do this prior to our August break? And then if we're going to do a housing workshop, could we include the consideration of the short-term rental bylaw at the same time? Councillor Ledwig.
I don't think there's a rush to get this done before we go on summer break. I mean, staff are actively working on a number of these items kind of regularly anyways. Like I don't want it to drift, but if this gets done in September, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, I know we've tasked staff with a few other items that we wanted done before summer break. I don't know what our agenda is looking like. We have 2 meetings left, but we should probably revisit what we've already asked them to do before summer break, before we think about whether or not we could add that in there. So personally, I'm in favor of putting it off until September. Whether I really want to see the short-term rental bylaw done as well. If we want to do all those together, that's great. But maybe instead of rushing it, let's set aside a good chunk of time to do both of these items in the fall. What have you.
Might be helpful too to know exactly what direction the regional housing strategy is going in and where we fit with that. So Councillor Diendraad and then Councillor Kroll.
I agree with Councillor Ledwig that we can, the strategy, maybe we can, just for the amount of work, but can we look at the SCRT bylaw before then? Because at least for me in particularly, at the beginning, you know, there were so many things and I was looking at everything and understanding. And I think this time that passed, it was actually really good. I had a better understanding and even the understanding what's happening in other communities. So to me, it's clear, at least a direction. And even if it's a direction that we should take right now and we revise in 6 months or in a year. So I wonder if it's feasible to bring the bylaw before, because perhaps there's not too much to be done at this point.
Are you, sorry? Oh.
Yeah. No, sorry, go ahead, Lucian.
Sorry, are you talking about the short-term rental bylaw? Is that what you're talking about? Okay, so there was quite a change in direction from that last council meeting. So initially we were only allowing hosted short-term rentals, and that changed to allow unhosted short-term rentals with restrictions on where the operator could reside and the time period for rentals. So we've been trying to figure out how we could bring a bylaw like that forward that is enforceable, and that's been the challenging piece. Is we're finding that it's really, really difficult to enforce what this council has requested. So we have a short-term rental bylaw on the books that has had first and second reading. We could bring that bylaw forward, but part of our research is around how to address what council has asked for to allow unhosted short-term rentals. And I think it's going to open up another conversation about where these unhosted short-term rentals should be allowed, what the scale and scope of that looks like. And we might end up going back to allowing hosted short-term rentals with limitations on secondary suites or garden suites or something like that. So it's going to be a bigger discussion.
Yeah. And I can tell you that the biggest challenge with a short-term rental bylaw that the regional district is finding is enforceability. Once you have it in place, you have the complaints coming in and saying, you know, this is happening, and we simply don't have the capacity. So we need to also look at enforcement capacity once we have that in place, among other things, among other issues that we have that require enforcement. So yeah. But I, as you know, I'm on record as supporting the short-term rental bylaw as it stands, and if we move forward. But I appreciate other councillors have other views on that. So. Councillor Kroll, and then we need to move on.
In the interest of time, I would just, you know, if we could revisit the short-term bylaw, you know, I'm in agreement with Mayor Beamish. You know, we can change it, knock it about 6 ways from 7 until the cows come home. But I think it's important that we get a bylaw in place that as of January 1, anyone who wants to operate a short-term rental is standing at the front counter getting their business license. Because if we don't have a bylaw in place, you can't enforce anything. What are you enforcing?
Mm.
So, it's a double, we're just sort of, and put a caveat in it that we go with what was proposed and review it in 6 months.
So council, we have a recommendation on the table here, and that is the regarding this particular report. Perhaps we need to add to this resolution the idea of the council arranging a workshop, the staff arranging a workshop for council to prioritize the actions listed in the housing strategy recommendations. And then maybe do we also want to say anything about bringing forward the short-term rental bylaw, bringing forward? So, so that do we want to at this time? Are we endorsing the housing strategy, or are we endorsing the direction of the housing, or endorsing the strategy as a draft to be worked on? Yeah. Okay. So let's try that. One, that council endorses the housing strategy as a draft for, and that council directs staff to arrange a workshop for council to prioritize the actions listed in the housing strategy recommendations, and that staff bring forward the short-term rental bylaw for further consideration by council. Do we want to say when? Is there any of the elements there that we should be saying that in terms of the strategy? Are we saying September in terms of short-term rental? Or are we saying July? Or are we saying September for all of it? Okay. So I'm going to go to Councillor Kroll, although he did second those recommendations, which I seem to have made. So what do you have to say, Councillor Kroll?
All I was going to say is the only thing that I would like to see that we have in place out of this is a short-term rental bylaw in place before January 1st. Okay. So people can work with that. And because the housing is so contingent off of the short-term rental, to my mind.
So let's put all these recommendations down in terms of a targeted date for September 2021. Are we agreed?
And do staff have the capacity to make that happen?
Well, of course, we're not going to be here in August, so they have nothing to do. Yeah. Rebecca, Corporate Officer.
Yes, seeking some clarification on the motion. So the motion was moved by Mayor Beamish and seconded by Councillor Kroll, that council endorses the housing strategy as a draft for the town of Gibsons, and that council directs staff to arrange a workshop. And it went very quickly, but I can check the recording on that. But the last bit that Councillor Kroll just said, is that part of the motion? Was that an amendment to the motion or added to the motion?
The third bullet was that we bring back the short-term rental bylaw for consideration also in September. The second one is that council directs staff to arrange a workshop for council to prioritize the actions listed in the housing strategy recommendations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councilor Deirdre?
Yes, thank you, Mirish. If I may say the last thing, Matthew, if it's possible, just following up on the feedback, I think every strategy has to have an evaluative component. I think and I know it's difficult, but I would like to understand how, what framework we can use that we say, well, we have X number of short-term rentals and therefore they are giving, this, we are having this impact and we can measure over time. Because what I feel is we have these policies, right, that we do with the best intent, but few years later, we don't really know the impact. So if this could be possible of part of the framework, I know strategically speaking, you have to have an evaluative component, right? Otherwise, you cannot. What you don't measure, you don't manage. So, but I'll leave this with you for now. Yeah. Otherwise, it will be work for our staff.
I think that could be part of the discussion and part of what's looked at between now and September to come back to us and looking at that. Any further discussion on the recommendations? I appreciate council's urgency also in wanting to move forward, urgency in fact, in the context now of the next 6 months, I would say, but I think that's still doable for us. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? See no opposed. Thank you. And thank you, Matt. A big piece of work for a small town and a small town capacity. And so that's always I mean, we very much look like a big town when we adopt some of these things, and we're still not, but we're trying to get it right. So appreciate your help on that.
Thank you very much, Council.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie Ann, for your presentation. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and this is the report on Garrowpoint Road traffic calming. This is for information which is being received. Yeah. And I should also mention with this, I'm sure that Mr. Newman was going to mention as well, but there is the June 21st community consultation meeting on this issue, so among others. So, Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I'm looking slightly over my screen here because I've got a short PowerPoint to help describe the works that are being proposed on Garrowpoint Road. But just a little bit of background. As you are aware, the development agreement was registered on title as part of the rezoning process for Block 7. And some of the terms in there are that the owner shall, prior to completion of phase 1 development, construct to the satisfaction of the Director of Infrastructure Services, the road service on an adjacent multi-use path, which is on the water side of Garrowpoint Road, running from Franklin to the town's Sunshine Coast boundary, and also to provide traffic calming elements, road alignment, or other design features to facilitate a maximum speed of 30 kilometers an hour. Accordingly, the developer's civil engineer engaged a traffic consultant to provide options and recommendations. The road conditions, and I'll have some photographs to show you shortly. And I'm sure you're well aware that that section of Garrowpoint Road is very narrow and winding. There's corners that are difficult to see around, and some vertical grade changes that also create visibility issues. I was just driving down there myself and kind of glancing down at my speedometer, and really, I didn't feel all that comfortable driving faster than 40 kilometers an hour. And that is, in fact, is the advisory speed limit along there. And what I mean by advisory speed limit is often you will see a curve ahead or a winding road or what have you, and there is a black on yellow tab below that warning sign that indicates a lower speed limit. However, that's just advisory. It's not regulatory. The regulatory is black on white. So technically, the speed limit along there is actually 50 kilometers an hour, but it's posted with an advisory of 40 kilometers an hour. The traffic consultant was out there and have seen or witnessed typically speeds 40 kilometers to 50 kilometers an hour. And although, as I say, that is the legal speed limit, it doesn't feel that comfortable, and it's certainly not comfortable for pedestrians or cyclists, not only because of the speed, but just because of the lack of visibility and not entirely knowing what is coming. And then, you also have very limited places that you can go should something go sideways on you. You've got a fairly steep drop off on the one side and a rock face on the other. This is in the official community plan and has been recognized for years as a section of road that is desirable to improve, and that is where the recommendation or the requirement in the development agreement came from. Another piece of background that is important is road classifications. And so the three main classifications from, I guess, lowest vehicle volume to highest would be local road at the bottom of the pack. Then they go to collector road and then to arterial. And Garrow Point Road is actually classified as a collector road. And a collector road is meant to collect the traffic from local roads and then channel it to the arterial roads. And in this case, nearby arterial roads are Pratt Road and Gibson's Way or Highway 101. So the system of our roads is meant to, it's not just kind of random on what we would like to see, but it is designed in order to make sure that that channeling occurs with traffic. Now, Garrow Point Road, at least on that section, is a little bit of an odd duck because it's, although it's identified as a collector and may in many instances function as a collector, it really is not, the topography is really not conducive to a collector road. And I'm not suggesting that it be downgraded to a local, but more that specialized or unique improvements need to be made to that road in order to have it function safely as a collector road. Looking at the official community plan, again, I mentioned that that's where this objective came from. And that is our, the town's guiding document. So for collector roads where residential development is the anticipated land use, which in this case is, although there is fairly limited residential use along there, there is still some. When that is the focus, bicycle facilities and sidewalks are to be via multi-use trails. Now, on the multi-use trail, for want of a better word, on the water side will be via a combination of a boardwalk and a shared area for two-way pedestrian traffic and single-way cyclists. And it's meant to be as a lower speed trail as well. It's not a kind of a commuter type speed boardwalk. And the landward side, council has provided direction to approach the developer to seek agreement to eliminate the proposed multi-use trail that was included in the development agreement. And where that's at right now is the developer has not yet formally agreed to the change in the agreement. As the multi-use trail is not an option, unless council changes their direction, or if significant blasting would be to take place in order to widen the road for cyclists or pedestrians. Safe passage for cyclists has to be accommodated within the existing paved road extents. Now, although that wasn't the driving reason behind the 30-kilometer-hour speed limit, the focus has changed slightly, I suppose, as far as the reason behind that. It's not just to make it a more comfortable area for people to and from the viewpoint, the Gospel Rock viewpoint, but it's also now intended to improve the safety for cyclists. There's a number of other items in the the OCP. As we can tell from some of the traffic counts, the section of Gallpoint Road is a lot of drive-through vehicles from the ferry to and from Area E. And from a strictly engineering point of view and the road network design, those vehicles getting off the ferry should be traveling up the bypass and down Highway 101 and then down Pratt into neighborhoods beyond. That doesn't always occur, and lots of drivers, for understandable reasons, do cut through Gibsons to Area E. There's two maps that have been included in the report. One of them showing the various classifications of road. They don't show all the classifications of the roads within the regional district, but suffice it to say that Pratt is one of those roads, and we are aware of concerns from Pratt Road residents that the ministry needs to address at some point. The ministry, again, from a strictly engineering point of view, looks at that road and says, yeah, you're not at capacity yet, and therefore the road isn't due to be upgraded. And that's heavily paraphrased from myself, but essentially there is still capacity for vehicles on Pratt Road. The reason I'm mentioning that is because some of these traffic calming, proposed traffic calming solutions in order to get vehicles down to that 30 km/h will potentially cause vehicles to be using Pratt instead. And that a lot of times is the reason for traffic calming, is to make sure that vehicles are going to or using the routes that are intended to channelize traffic in the way the network was designed. I'm just going to share my screen here and just run you briefly through the well, not entirely briefly, because I do want council to be clear on, or committee to be clear on, what is being proposed along this, because this will be impactful, which it's meant to be impactful. It's meant to slow traffic, and it's meant to make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists. So there's no two ways about it. It's going to be impactful. So I am just going to set my slideshow up here, and that's not going to work. Hang on, I got to share my screen first, I think. Okay, so do you see my slideshow by chance?
Not yet, no. There we are, got it.
Got it? Okay. And I'm just going to change it to a larger, and are you still able to see it okay?
Thank you.
Good. So the Gallpoint Road traffic calming, the section that we're talking about on the screen, I think I have an option to change my cursor, pen and laser pointer. Hang on. This will be worth the effort. There we go. Okay, so see my little red bouncing dot here. So the section that we're talking about is from Glassford and Franklin at the intersection of Gallpoint Road through along Gospel Rock to the town boundary, and Secret Beaches is over here. So there's been several proposed traffic calming elements to be installed along this section of road. Now, with the exception of one of the solutions, all of the proposals or all the proposed treatments are modest impact. So in my experience and professional opinion, it's important that we take a good shot at our opportunity now to make sure that we are being effective with the elements, the traffic calming elements that are being proposed. And so for starters, there's a recommendation for centerline rumble strips, and I'll show you an overall view in a minute of each segment of the road in 3 segments of the road. I just wanted to go over the elements first. So likely you've all driven over rumble strips at some time in your driving career. Often they are on the inside edge of the road to say that you're drifting over, and it makes quite a rumbling, thundering sound that wakes you up out of your daydreaming. There's some complaints, however, that rumble strips are not all that friendly to have in a residential neighborhood because they are loud outside of the vehicle as well. And believe it or not, they have something else called mumble strips, and they have less sound that is that can be heard outside of the vehicle. And so in areas where there are residential homes, we would put in the proposed mumble strips. The next item, which is the only element that will have a noticeable impact on reducing vehicle speed, and I anticipate vehicle volume as well. And that is a short, I believe it's 60 to 80 meters long is being proposed, one-way section. And it's very similar operationally to bridges that you often will see in areas that may have taken over a logging area. I can think of some just outside of Lillooet, where it's first come, first serve, and the vehicle that arrives at one end or the other proceeds through, while the vehicle, the oncoming traffic or vehicle waits for the oncoming vehicle to pass by, and then it's their turn. And in a way, it's kind of a similar concept as a four-way stop. You have that courtesy part. Yes, you can always have people who don't take their turn properly, but the rules of the road are that you have you take turns at a four-way stop based on who arrived first. This one picture here was used actually in Saanich, where they had problems with road safety and vehicle speed, and it's a very, very winding road as well, but was experiencing increasing traffic and speed along a winding road. One other part of that is that this, and what's shown in the picture actually is the temporary measures they put in place before they put in the permanent measures. And with the permanent measures, there's a barricade along the one side, well, actually both sides, but you could create an area for cyclists to continue on without actually having to use the one-way section. They will be off on the one side of the road that is made available because of the one-way vehicle traffic. The next one is a safety fence. However, at this point, staff aren't recommending this installation unless council specifically wanted to see it. It is not going to have that much effect on what I call the southbound traffic. The road goes both north-south as well as a section east-west, but I'm calling it generally a north-south road. And it would have effect on the northbound traffic, so vehicles traveling from Secret Beach towards Gibsons, but not so much on vehicles traveling out of Gibsons over to Area E, which is the direction that we need the vehicles to be slower. We are constructing or having the developer construct it in such a manner so that if it was desired at a later time, some sort of railing could be put up at a future time. And I may have jumped. Yeah, I did. Now this is a little bit difficult to demonstrate, but or to illustrate, but something else that can be used as a visual traffic calming. It's not as effective, but it creates this visual narrowing of the road and at isolated locations. And so at this point, we're proposing or the developer's consultant is proposing 2 locations, both at a crosswalk that would be, there would be 1 crosswalk at either end of this stretch of road. And what you would see, and this is actually North Fletcher, what you would see is the width of the asphalt being 6 meters, same as it is currently. And then as you approach a crosswalk, the asphalt would narrow to 4 meters, but overall, the width of the road remains the same. It remains at 6 meters. And it's just visually, you see the asphalt get narrower, and that causes or should cause drivers to slow as it appears to be narrower, but in fact is not. Now, one caution I have about all of these elements, with the exception of the localized road narrowing, is for anyone who commutes and uses this road regularly, that old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. As soon as they realize that they can actually drive over these visual narrowings, and that yes, in fact, there are rumble strips there, but it's just a noise, they will potentially just carry on drive or going back to driving their old way of doing their old way of driving, because in fact there's nothing physical or uncomfortable in any of these elements, as I say, with the exception of that localized road narrowing. So we've got I've got slides showing 3 segments of this section of road. And so this one is Franklin Road coming in, and this one is over here is Glassford. You can see the proposed pedestrian improvements or multi-use path that is along the one side of the road. And then we've got a crosswalk that would come from the other side of the road, where there are 6 lots proposed to be created that we're currently working through the final stages of approval. And then it will also link up to a trail in this area. And so there are those narrowing concrete bands that I talked about. And as I say, crosswalk and just this visual narrowing as you head towards Secret Beach from Gibsons. So if I'm going to do I am going to be doing a presentation on this on the 21st of June to the general public, and I will improve on my drafting techniques on screen drawing. But this is what it looks like as you're facing or driving towards the intersection at Glassford, and you have these concrete narrowing that are represented by these lines here. Again, visually it narrows the road, but in actuality, you can drive on the concrete, and then you've got your crosswalk that would be there. And in fact, the crosswalk markings would extend over the concrete as well. And then this is the view on the right-hand side when you're standing or driving at Franklin and heading towards Gospel Rock. The next one is kind of an S curve, and you can see the location down here on that segment of road. And largely we're looking at the mumble strips that I mentioned, because we have residential properties here. And this is really the end of the residential, developed residential properties. The rest you're into the protected area of Gospel Rock. And so no homes. And so you could convert to the rumble strips along the next section of road. So fairly simple along that segment. And again, I've done my little sketching with those orange lines, is that as you are heading towards Secret Beach, there's the last driveway, and you would have the mumble strips along there, along the center line of the road. And then as you are heading out of Secret Beach and back towards Gibsons, that segment there has a section of rumble strips. So this is the middle, is it the middle or the last? No, it's the last segment of road. And again, the rumble strips on that corner that goes right past the proposed viewpoint of Gospel Rock itself. And we've got the rumble strips. We've got the visual narrowing of the road there with the concrete strips, and the crosswalk again that takes you from a planned trail coming down the hillside across the road to the pedestrian facilities that are along the water side. And then immediately after that, once you go into that straight section, you've got a 60-meter section of one-way road that you, as I say, you would have to take turns to go through that one section. So on the right of your screen, I've kind of drawn that in as a black line. No idea if it's to scale or not, but it's not that much further than what you see. And cyclists could use this one section along here as a dedicated bike lane, a short section of dedicated bike lane, while vehicles would be alternating through this narrowed section. And then on the left side of your screen is approaching from the Secret Beach direction. And again, we have those concrete bands that visually narrow the road, and a crosswalk that will take you from a planned trail over to the boardwalk that is located here. And so the only thing that has not been shown in here, which isn't really a traffic calming element at all, but there are some isolated locations where we could do very short sections of widening of the road in order to create a bit of a refuge for cyclists who perhaps have a vehicle behind them. They're traveling at a more leisurely pace. They want to allow a vehicle to pass them, and they can pull off the main traveled lane to allow a vehicle to pass. So with the exception of those pullouts and of this short one-way section, cyclists are to be in traffic, are to be riding with the vehicles. So it is very important that vehicles do not exceed that 30 km/h speed limit. In fact, if they can get, if we can get vehicles down to 20 kilometers an hour, that's so much the better. I don't have the data in front of me, but the collision with a cyclist or pedestrian at 30 kilometers an hour it gets exponentially worse above 30 kilometers an hour as far as injuries or possibility of a fatality. So that 30 kilometer hour or 20 kilometer hour benchmark is really important to try and get below. That is actually, maybe I shouldn't have. I can go back to any of these should council wish. I've probably said all that I need to, so I'll punt it back to committee for any questions that you might have.
Dave, thank you very much. Very gives us lots to think about, obviously. Where are we in terms of the process? What are we looking at in your process of consultation on this?
So we, as far as the public consultation goes, we met with Trac on site. They provided a memo to staff, and council also received a copy of that. That was forwarded with some of their ideas to the traffic consultant, and there's a list actually in your report of some of the elements that were suggested, or that are traffic elements that or are traffic calming elements that could be considered. However, they were not appropriate for this section. The only one that was adapted or deemed to be appropriate and was adapted is this short one-way section to slow traffic. On the 21st of June, we're going to have a public meeting to go over this traffic calming proposal, as well as our overall cycling network improvements that we received as part of that grant. And from that point, staff will be getting back to the developer to go into a detailed design, because they need that detailed design completed in order for them to determine what their bonding is required for their subdivision. And so, you know, I'm not looking to rush it through, but I'm certainly looking to get this get my comments back to them before the end of July.
Thank you. I'll go to council briefly. Will we be seeing this again, Dave, after the consultation?
I think it probably depends on the outcome of that consultation. I can virtually guarantee you that drivers aren't going to be, or there may be many drivers that will have a problem with this, because drivers are interested in getting to point A to point B as fast as reasonably possible. And if they are regular users of this route, this is certainly going to slow them down. And therefore, they're not necessarily going to be in favor of this unless they are a cyclist and they recognize the fact that council's making a combination for all road users. We do plan on having another meeting with Trac we've got a number of meetings planned with Trac to talk about the grant works, and this will be part of a conversation with Trac to look for any input that they may have from a cyclist perspective. So that's the extent of the consultation that we were intending. However, if council wishes to see it come back regardless, we would have to plan that for July.
Okay. I'm sorry, one more question I have is the portion of Gospel Rock, the viewpoint, is that designated park area in the plan?
There is a section of that rock lookout that is designated park, and on either side of that is conservation area, as is conservation area uphill from there.
Okay. And the traffic speed through a park area, is it same as normal, or is it go down to 20?
I think if you're like you have playground areas, that sort of park, where you typically would slow to 30 kilometers an hour, and that would be posted. Actually, that's posted with a regulatory tab as opposed to an advisory, and so that's an enforceable one. Same thing with school areas. However, this stretch of road would get posted either at 20 or 30 kilometers an hour, and that would have to be done by bylaw, and that would be a regulatory, not advisory speed limit, so that the police could in fact enforce it. But any different speed limit from 50 kilometers an hour has to be done by bylaw through council, and that would certainly be a component of this, is to have that posted as an appropriate speed. And we will be looking to the traffic consultant for his recommendations in that regard.
I look forward to the consultation. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Dindrad, then Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Dave. I really support the concept of a single lane segment. I think it's really important. It's key to addressing, what the effect we want to have, which is slow traffic, support active transportation, and protect the people, right? The cyclists, children biking, tourism, and so on, tourists walking. In doing my research, because I was reading the Active Transportation Design Guide here, I found out that urban systems was part of the consulting team. This is from 2019. So what I would like to see, and actually I would like to even to put this motion forward, that urban systems look at this proposal. Because, even though I'm sure, Green Lane did a great job, but, they're not our consultants, right? I don't know, I'm not expert, even though I like a lot of the things, I don't know if this is the best outcome, but urban systems seems to be the experts in active transportation. So if council agrees, I would like to move a recommendation that the plans are vetted by urban system with obviously support of TRAC, and I'm happy to hear that it's going back to TRAC, and then it's brought back to council. I think it's really important. I mean, we have to, this is a very sensitive thing. I think as more feedback we have from expert, the better. If we have to, at the same time, we don't want, accidents happening in the future. And when you support active transportation, it is well known that the only safe way to support, the best way to support active transportation, if with actual separation of the lanes, which is not going to happen. I mean, with a barricade or something, unfortunately. So we're still going to be supporting people to come and to bike and to walk, but we also know that many drivers don't respect. So I think I'm looking, even though I think, there's a lot of the things addressed here, but I would like to have, we have contracted urban systems, and I think it will be incredible to have their feedback.
Hey, Victor, do we have a budget for that or with urban systems, or is that comes out of ours, I imagine?
I'd like to just respond to that before any resolutions made in that regard. Right. So it's often said that, we've got the developers engineer, or the developers this or the developers that. They don't actually work for Green Lane. They are a consultant. And in this case, it was Bunt who prepared this. And Bunt was actually the company that the town hired quite a few years ago for doing traffic calming study throughout the whole town. So although they may work for the developer or work for the town or what have you, they have professional standards that they work towards. It doesn't matter who they are working for. They are not on staff of the developer. They are just strictly consultants. And one other thing to put into consideration here is that there was another traffic consultant that was initially engaged by the developer, and staff, namely myself, was not happy with their solutions. I'll just say that at this point. And so at the direction of staff, the developer did engage another consultant and Bunt is very experienced in this sort of work. Having said that, if council wants a third opinion or what have you, that can certainly be done. The challenge again, we're getting down to this whole, developer or peer review in a way, and Bunt are experts in this field, and they are the ones that are signing off on this. It becomes somewhat difficult when we bring another engineering firm in to provide comment when they're not actually the people putting their stamp to it. And are we actually asking them to act as a peer reviewer? What is their role? And I do understand, what you're saying is, hey, we've got good working relationship with Urban Systems, and we respect their opinions or their expertise. However, it puts them in a certain situation, a certain professional position, I suppose, reviewing another traffic consultant's report. As I say, where Bunt is an expert in this field, they're not on staff with the developer, and they do work for the town as well. I'm just, council can direct staff as they wish, of course.
Councillor Ludwig, and I'll just remind council of the time, and we have another meeting at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Mr. Newman. I really actually appreciate your chicken scratch. I think I'm very happy with it, and I wouldn't feel that you need to improve it for a public meeting. It's very effective. I understand what you're proposing. So I think that's great. Anyways, I like what I'm seeing, but I am very interested in hearing what the community has to say. And so I just want to say I really appreciate that you're holding this public meeting on the 21st. And I believe I've already seen a meeting invite in my inbox inviting me to that meeting. So I really appreciate that. Plan to attend, I hope, if my schedule works. So anyways, I just want to say I support the fact that we're getting more community input into it. So far, I'm liking what I'm seeing with regard to Councillor DeAndretti's request to have this go through Urban Systems. I would say, why don't we just wait and see what the community has to say first, and then we can decide then whether or not we think more advice is necessary. I appreciate what you're also saying, Director, that they are both professionals, and if these individuals are professionals in the field, then we should also respect that too. So anyway, yeah, thank you. I like where it's going so far.
Councillor Lumley.
I have a number of questions. I might form them in an email and send them, only because I have to, I'm on a time budget right now, just so I can get back for the 6 o'clock meeting. But, quickly, I think I already mentioned this to you once, but was there ever a thought of closing the road? I mean, if you want to funnel traffic into major routes, especially ferry traffic away from this, was that ever a consideration, and just making it a community trail, forming part of the trail?
Yeah. it would be extremely impactful to the community and would even in an emergency situation would tend to isolate segments of both sides. So one way wasn't even recommended.
Okay, and just I don't know about slowing people down, but another thing, just not slowing cars down, slowing bikes down too. I don't know what you can do about that, but I know people, everybody and their brother has an electric bike now, and I see them like people are just ripping by my business on the C path. And I'm sure this will be open road for these guys. They'll just be like cruising. So I don't know if there's any consideration to that. I mean, it's almost as dangerous as a car, or as dangerous running into a car, because these bikes are generating such high rates of speed. So anyway.
Yeah, and the enforcement of speed limit would be the RCMP, and electric bikes and bicyclists in general are required to abide by the posted speed limit. And as I say, that measures are being put in place to slow vehicles, and I hear what you're saying about the bikes as well.
And Councillor Kroll, did I miss your hand?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question, Dave, and I think the public hearing is going to bring a lot. The walkway on the water side, who is responsible for the ongoing and continuing maintenance of it?
That will be at the end of, or once it's constructed, the town will take that over.
So in the winter, when it's covered, when it's frosty, are we going to be salting it? Are we going to be putting grit down? If we get snow, are we going to be clearing it?
It will depend on the policy that we have in place. So whenever we're constructing new sidewalks or bikeways, etc., that our snow and ice clearing policy really should be updated to consider those improvements.
So in the plan, it's showing as a wooden walkway. Do we have equipment that could remove snow on it?
Yeah, shown as wooden. We're also in discussions about that, but regardless, when you have an elevated, like a bridge, that's always the first thing that gets frost. And yes, we do have smaller equipment that is able to drive on that.
And do we have any projections of what the annual maintenance costs would be?
Not of that, no. And snow clearing is always difficult because it's such a hit and miss. You can have some years that are quite expensive and others that are not so much.
Okay, it's just looking at the plans and the drawings, it was one of the first things that sort of came to mind is who's responsible. And if it is wood, just the deterioration and the replacement of the wood.
Yeah, and that's we are looking like generally speaking, it's noted as a wooden boardwalk. However, we are having discussions as to the type of material that would have the least amount of maintenance.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor D'Andrade, last word.
Thank you, Mayor. I think just on the feedback from the Director of Infrastructure, I think obviously Webster, right, is a reputable firm, but doesn't mean to be expert in calming, traffic calming necessarily has expertise in active transportation. And the fact that Urban System, who is working directly with us, was part of the design, created the design guide, the 2019 design guide. I think this is very relevant. And given the area, this is our most, basically the top pristine views in our town. Is this and then the harbor. I think this is a place that's going to generate a lot of interest, and I think it's important to get right. And I understand what the director mentioned about getting another company, but this is a company that has invested expertise in designing active transportation. I don't know if the other company has this expertise.
Yes, they do.
That's-
And
that's
it's not Webster. It's Webster is the main civil engineer for the project. No, this is Bunt and Bunt and Associates, and they are transportation planning and engineers. So active transportation is very much a part of that. That's their focus. So this is their area of expertise.
Okay, I would like to understand why the single lane segment was not proposed throughout the whole area in place, just a little small segment, right?
Because then you would need traffic control, because the short segment, you are able to see the other vehicle. And so you don't need lights and traffic signals. Those can be, fairly effective, but this is intended as a short enough section so that you can actually see the vehicle.
But why we're not considering lights?
The considerable amount more expense, and it was felt that was too isolating and would really almost kind of get it down to a local road. It still is a connection between communities, and that's certainly kind of going above and beyond. That's as I say, they did look at that and felt that it was not appropriate for the location.
Okay, Council, I'm going to draw an end to this conversation. It is going to be on the public consultation on the 21st. I hope you're all able to be there and listen to what the community has to say. And then, Ms. New, I would like to see it come back to council after the public consultation so that we can express what we heard as well and look at that. So if we could maybe arrange to have that on the committee of the whole in July, the first committee of the whole in July, that would be great.
Sure, and I'll also report back on at that time the same meeting on the response from Glassford residents as well, because we've been talking about we had a community meeting with them already, and that way we can have all this in one report. That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah. The recommendation was to receive for information. We've done that. I'm going to suggest Council 3.3 Thrive. We've also received that. Director of Planning put that on our agenda. I'm actually going to be discussing this with the Public Art Committee on Thursday night. Wednesday, I haven't confirmed the meeting, and talk about the option. What we're looking at is if we're going to do anything on this, it's a September intake we're looking at, so that take a look and see what might be possible relative to project. It's up to $50,000 fully funded for a project to reinvigorate a downtown cores or downtown areas, or connectivity between two is the other option. Mr. Newman? Yes, just briefly, Mayor Beamish, I hear your desire to get out of here. The 5-year budget, we provided a list of projects that would be good grant eligible projects or community amenities. And one of those ones that has been on the list for at least 2 years and really fits nicely with the size and the objective of this grant is the removal of the old tourist information building and turning that into more of a feature as you come into town. But this could be the first step. And there could be a budget for just making grass and picnic tables in there for now. But there's also the opportunity for public art or location of the Persephone, etc. Yeah, the simply removal of the building would not qualify under that program. It has to be a significant enhancement of a active tourism feature. It's so that and a capital project is not part of that sort of thing. So we'd have to take a look at that. But yeah, but if it was remove and replace with something immediately as an active feature, yeah, I agree that Persephone could be an option there. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have to move on there. I'm going to go now to 4 inquiries. I don't know if anybody stayed with us as long, but if anybody is there and wishes to
to make an inquiry, Director of Corporate Officer, I'll invite you to bring them in.
Sure. If anyone is wishing to address council at this time, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised, Mayor Beamish.
Thank you very much. So then the next meeting will be held on Tuesday, July 6th at 3 p.m., at which time we'll have an update on this project, I'm sure. And I'm going to ask council for adjournment at this time. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Crowell, Councillor Ladwig, all in favor of adjournment. Thank you. And we'll see you all back here in 40 minutes. Okay, thank you. See you then.